I sat still in the plastic chair, watching the rhythm of the heart monitor, its beeping faint beneath the fluorescent hum of the hospital lights. The woman in the bed, my daughter Ashley, was barely recognizable beneath the tubes and bruises, her expression slack, her eyes shut to the world she'd spent years trying to control. I should have cried, but I didn't. The last time we were in a hospital room together, she laughed and said, "Mom's finally brain dead. Guess I'm free now." Her voice had a sharp edge to it, the kind that doesn't dull with time. She thought she was untouchable, that the roles between us had reversed forever. She had no idea what silence can grow in someone who's been dismissed for too long. Now it was my turn to watch, and I wasn't laughing, not anymore, but I smiled, just faintly, because earlier that morning, her kids called Child Protective Services on her, and that call was only the final act in a story she'd been writing with every choice she made. Let me tell you how we got here. If you've ever loved someone so completely that you lost yourself in the process, only to watch them weaponize that love against you, then this story will speak to you. If you've ever felt the slow burn of being erased in your own family, only to rise again with quiet, calculated strength, then I hope you'll stay. Hit that like button if you've ever been pushed to the margins by someone who thought your silence meant weakness. Subscribe for more stories where justice isn't loud or cruel, it's deliberate. And when it finally comes, it doesn't shout, it stands still, and it lets the guilty unravel all by themselves. My name is Marla Whitmore. I'm 63 years old, and I've spent most of my life believing that love was something you proved through sacrifice. I buried a husband when I was 37, raised our only child alone, and never remarried. There were suitors, there were opportunities, but none more important than Ashley. She was 6 when cancer took her father, and from that moment on, I made it my mission to give her a life that grief couldn't stain. She was smart, defiant, a spark I mistook for resilience. I pushed for the best schools, the right teachers, the cleanest start. When money got tight, I took on night shifts, extra consulting work, whatever it took. And when her moods began to sour in adolescence, sharp words, distant stares, I chalked it up to the weight of grief she didn't know how to carry. I gave her time. I gave her space. I gave her everything. Years passed. She graduated with honors, married too young, divorced too fast. She called the man toxic, unstable, unreliable, and maybe he was. I didn't ask questions. I only came when she asked. That's how I ended up back in her house 5 years ago after she had Brady and Lila, 2 beautiful kids who didn't deserve the chaos surrounding them. She needed help. I moved into her guest room. I told myself it was temporary. Ashley was 34 then, and I noticed something different about her, something meaner than what I remembered. She was sharp with the children, impatient, constantly tethered to her phone. The kind of mother who looked at her kids like interruptions. And to me, well, I wasn't a person anymore. I was an asset. "Can you take them to school tomorrow? I've got a thing," she'd say, tossing keys on the counter without looking up. You used to be a social worker, right? So you know how to talk to them about emotions or whatever. At first, I dismissed it. She was overwhelmed, exhausted. She had 2 kids and a career she was trying to build. I told myself to be patient. I made the meals, I did the laundry, I tucked the kids in when she forgot. But little things began to sting. She'd correct me in front of Brady, "No, Grandma doesn't know what she's talking about," or mock my memory whenever I misplaced something. Once, when I asked her to speak more gently to the children, she looked at me and said, "You raised me, didn't you? Maybe that's why I am the way I am." Her voice was always casual when she cut me open, always smooth. I didn't want to make waves. The children needed stability, and I believed I could absorb the sharpness. But the balance started shifting. I wasn't just a guest. I was the help. She started locking certain cupboards. The kids are too messy, and left me to figure out dinner with whatever was left. There was a moment, I remember it too clearly, when Lila asked me, "Grandma, how come Mommy never smiles when we hug her?" And all I could do was brush her hair back and lie. "She's just tired, sweetheart. That's all." It was subtle at first, the way the house began to feel like hers and mine at the same time, but not equally. I kept telling myself that things would even out once she caught her breath, once she settled into herself again. But deep down, I already knew. Ashley wasn't exhausted. She wasn't lost. She was in control, and she liked the feeling of being above the woman who once held her whole world together. And I was beginning to understand what it meant to be used. The shift didn't happen all at once. It was a slow erosion, like water running through stone, steady, invisible, permanent. Ashley's demands grew sharper while her warmth vanished altogether. There were days she wouldn't speak to me at all unless she needed something, and when she did, her voice carried the weight of entitlement rather than gratitude. I remember one Saturday morning when Brady had a fever. Ashley was already dressed for brunch with a friend, coat slung over her shoulder, perfume cloud trailing behind her. I told her he needed rest, a visit to the doctor maybe, but she barely glanced up. "You were a social worker, not a pediatrician. You'll figure it out," she said, before disappearing out the door. I sat by Brady's bedside for hours, holding his hand as his small body trembled, whispering stories to calm him. She came back that evening with shopping bags and an eye roll. No questions, no thank you. Her voice at home became a soundtrack of commands and corrections. "Why is the laundry still out? Did you overcook the rice again? Can you try not to confuse Lila with your ancient ideas about discipline?" The kids were watching all of it. Brady grew quieter, Lila clingier. Sometimes they'd follow me from room to room just for comfort. They asked questions Ashley never answered. "Why doesn't Mommy read bedtime stories?" Or, "How come she forgets our birthdays?" I covered for her, again and again, because I still hoped that something in her would change. But the turning point began with something far more mundane: money. Ashley started asking for small things: grocery gaps, a utility bill here or there. I agreed without protest. Then one afternoon, I checked my bank account. Nearly $3,000 was gone. I called her, assuming there'd been a mistake. She didn't even pretend to deny it. "You said everything you have is for the kids," she replied flatly. "So I'm using it. For the kids. What's the issue?" I stood there staring at my phone, her voice ringing in my ears. What was the issue? Maybe it was that I was funding the life of a woman who no longer saw me as her mother, but as a tool. Or maybe it was the way she made me question whether I even deserved boundaries anymore. One night, while cleaning the kitchen, I overheard her on the phone. She didn't know I was in the next room. Her voice was loud, unguarded, laced with amusement. Yeah, she just floats around the house like some ghost. Honestly, if she dropped dead tomorrow, it'd probably be a relief. She's a burden, not a person. I stood frozen behind the hallway wall, hands still wet from the sink, water dripping onto the tile as I listened. My heart didn't race. It cracked, soundlessly, like a branch in winter. The next morning, I collapsed in the hallway. My body, pushed too far for too long, gave out. When I came to, the kids were crying, and Ashley stood over me, annoyed. Not worried, not scared. "Are you seriously doing this now?" she muttered. "God, this is just like you, turning everything into a performance." I ended up in the hospital. Mild dehydration, fatigue, nothing fatal, but it wasn't the diagnosis that stuck with me. It was what she said during her visit when she thought I was asleep. Her voice was flippant, almost amused. "I'm not ready to play the grieving daughter," she told someone on the phone. "But if she kicks the bucket, I'll figure something out. Maybe the kids can stay with a sitter or something." That night, I stared at the ceiling in the hospital room and felt something shift inside me. Not rage, not despair, something colder, quieter. I realized that if I disappeared tomorrow, Ashley wouldn't mourn. She'd adjust. Quickly. The only ones who would suffer would be Brady and Lila. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't the one who needed saving. They were. The next day, I asked the nurse for a notebook. I began writing everything down: dates, quotes, patterns of behavior, incidents I'd witnessed, things the children had said. For the first time in years, my mind began to sharpen, not as a mother, not as a grandmother, but as a woman who had been deeply, dangerously underestimated. Ashley didn't know it, but the final line of her story had already begun. Not because I hated her, but because I loved her children more than she ever could. I didn't go back to Ashley's house right away. The doctors told me to rest, to let my body recover from the months of stress I'd pushed through in silence. But what they couldn't see were the gears shifting behind my still face. I'd spent a lifetime giving the benefit of the doubt, believing that love required tolerance. But now I understood something much deeper. Love without protection becomes complicity, and I refused to be complicit anymore. I called Ruth first. She was a former colleague of mine from my years in child welfare, now working with the Department of Family Services in a supervisory role. I hadn't spoken to her in nearly a decade. Still, when she answered, her voice softened at the sound of mine. "Marla," she said, "it's been too long." We met for coffee the following afternoon. I showed her the journal I'd started. I spoke slowly, methodically, laying out the emotional neglect, the manipulation, the moments that no one else saw. Ruth listened without interruption. When I was finished, she looked at me and said, "Start documenting everything, with dates, photos, receipts, conversations, no embellishments, just truth." And so I did. When I returned to Ashley's home, I was careful. I said all the right things. I smiled when I needed to. I let her believe she still had control. But every time she raised her voice at the children, every time she left for hours without saying where, every time she mocked me in front of Brady or Lila, I wrote it down. I began saving receipts for groceries she refused to buy, took photographs of empty refrigerators, dirty laundry piled in corners, and bruises Lila couldn't quite explain. I didn't accuse. I observed, quietly, consistently. And then I started planting seeds in the kids, not manipulation, just truth, wrapped gently in safety. "You know," I told Brady one night as we washed dishes together, "if you ever feel like something's wrong, you can always talk to someone about it, someone safe." "Like you?" he asked. "Like me," I said. "Or a teacher. Or someone whose job it is to help." He nodded slowly, his small hands rinsing the soap from a bowl, with care far beyond his years. Eventually, I told Ashley I'd be moving out. I said I needed my own space, a slower pace. She scoffed, as if the idea of me choosing myself was laughable. "Fine," she said. "Maybe now I'll finally get some peace." I left that weekend. The kids clung to my waist in the driveway. Ashley didn't even come outside. I set up a small apartment 5 miles away, close enough to remain accessible, but far enough to reclaim my identity. I called Ruth again. The case was opened within a week, filed under anonymous third-party concern. Nothing pointed back to me. Ashley had no idea. She went on living as though no one was watching, leaving the kids home with neighbors, yelling in public, showing up late to school events with excuses and sunglasses. But someone was watching, and it wasn't just me anymore. I didn't feel triumph. I felt clarity. I wasn't trying to destroy her. I was finally, deliberately protecting the ones who couldn't yet protect themselves. The first visit caught her off guard. A woman from CPS showed up on a Wednesday afternoon. Ashley had forgotten it was early dismissal day. Brady and Lila were alone on the front steps of the house, backpacks at their feet. The social worker noted the time, the unattended minors, the state of the entryway cluttered with trash bags and 2-day-old takeout containers. Ashley arrived 15 minutes later in gym clothes and sunglasses, annoyed rather than alarmed. She called me that evening, her voice flat and accusatory. "Did you say something?" I kept my tone steady. "I haven't spoken to anyone, Ashley, but maybe someone noticed something you didn't." I knew better than to provoke. I wanted her to unravel all on her own. The second visit came 10 days later. This time the children were interviewed separately. Brady told the caseworker that he didn't like when Mommy yelled after drinking the red juice in the tall glass. Lila said she missed reading books at bedtime because Mommy's phone is always in her hand and her hand smells like smoke. The house was noted as poorly maintained, no working smoke detector, medication bottles within reach of children, dishes crusted in the sink. Ashley responded with her usual charm turned hostility. "It's a witch hunt. My mother's just bitter. She's using you to get to me. But CPS doesn't run on spite. It runs on patterns." The school confirmed that the children were often tired, unwashed, and missing homework. The pediatrician, when contacted, revealed that Ashley hadn't brought them in for wellness checks in over 18 months. Still, none of this moved the process fast. Family court is cautious. CPS takes no pleasure in removal. But the walls were tightening, and Ashley, in her arrogance, kept talking. She confronted the kids about the interviews. "If you lie to those people, they'll take you away. Do you want that?" But the groundwork I'd laid held firm. Brady told his teacher. The teacher told CPS. And that report, combined with the rest, triggered an emergency custody hearing. The morning of the hearing was clear and bitterly cold. I walked into the courtroom in a plain grey coat, hands calm in my lap. Ashley sat 2 rows over, arms crossed, mouth tight. She didn't look at me. When I testified, I did not cry. I did not exaggerate. I read from my notes. I showed timestamps. I explained patterns. I spoke not as a victim, but as a witness who had waited long enough. Ashley's attorney tried to paint me as manipulative, controlling, resentful, but truth doesn't shake under pressure when it's been documented. Ruth's official CPS report was the final blow. A pattern of neglect, emotional volatility, unsafe supervision. Recommended temporary removal pending parental rehabilitation. When the judge issued the order granting me interim custody, the air in the courtroom shifted. Ashley's expression didn't change at first, but then she laughed. A small, brittle sound. "They'll hate you," she said. "Eventually, you'll mess up too." I didn't answer. The children were already waiting in a quiet room down the hall, their backpacks packed. Lila looked up when I walked in. "Are we coming with you?" I knelt beside her. "Yes, sweetheart. Just for a little while, until things are better." Brady held my hand as we walked to the car. Ashley stood on the sidewalk, arms out, calling their names. They didn't turn around, and I didn't look back, not out of spite, but because I had finally chosen to move forward. Ashley's world didn't collapse all at once. It fractured in pieces, slow, stubborn cracks that ran through the foundation she thought was untouchable. The court mandated supervised visitation, weekly therapy, parenting classes. She missed the first 2 sessions, blaming traffic and confusion. When the judge warned her with escalating consequences, she rolled her eyes. But the system, slow as it is, doesn't forget. Her friends stopped showing up. The social media glow she curated, smiling selfies, gym check-ins, filtered brunch plates, began to look like a mask with no face beneath it. Meanwhile, the children adjusted. Gently, gradually. In my apartment, we found rhythm. Morning routines with warm pancakes and soft music. Lila picked wildflowers on our walks and pressed them in a notebook. Brady rediscovered his laugh, the quiet kind he used to smother. We read together, cooked together, breathed again. One Sunday, there was a knock at the door. Ashley stood outside, no warning, her expression unreadable. "We were just starting a puzzle," I said. Brady stepped forward but didn't open the screen. "We're busy," he said. His voice was calm, not angry, just done. Ashley didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just stood there, unsure what to do without control in her hands. And after a long pause, she turned back toward her car and left. I didn't say a word. I just watched the curve of her shoulders as she walked away. Later that evening, I sat on the porch while the children played on the grass below, their laughter echoing off the wooden fence like music I hadn't heard in years. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I owed anyone anything. Not forgiveness, not explanation, just peace. And I held it quietly, like a seed in warm soil, ready to grow into something whole. For most of my life, I believed that love meant endurance, that if I stood still long enough, forgave deeply enough, bent without breaking, I could hold a family together with sheer will. But love without boundaries becomes a leash, and silence, even when dressed as patience, can become its own form of harm. Ashley didn't become who she is because I didn't try. She became who she is because she chose not to see anyone beyond herself. And in the end, it wasn't anger that set me free. It was the quiet decision to stop enabling a lie. I don't celebrate what happened. I don't take joy in her pain, but I do feel something stronger than joy. I feel release, because I know I didn't let those children fall through the cracks. And maybe, just maybe, they'll grow up knowing that love isn't something you exploit, it's something you protect. Ashley laughed when she thought I was gone, but I'm still here. And now I'm finally living on my own terms, with my eyes open and my back unbent. If you've ever had to draw a line between love and survival, you know the kind of strength it takes to walk away from someone you once would have walked through fire for. Tell me your story in the comments about the moment you stopped apologizing for protecting your peace, about the time you stopped letting someone rewrite your worth. And if this story resonated with you, if you've ever been the quiet one in the background who finally rose with purpose, hit that like button. Subscribe for more stories where justice doesn't come wrapped in rage, but in resolve. Because here, we believe dignity isn't lost, it's reclaimed, one choice at a time.